And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with John Faso, former U.S. Congressman for the state of New York. And John, not every day I have a former congressman on my program, so I'm going to broaden things out a little bit and just talk a little bit about the functionality of Congress these days, whether things can get done. And I guess the first topic is, how these geopolitical issues all of a sudden become fodder for the cycle of U.S. electoral politics. Let's take Russia, Ukraine as the first example. What are your thoughts and comments on that?
Well, you picked an easy one, didn't you? Uh,
Yeah,
I think that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is an outrage, and they clearly have committed human rights violations. What Putin has done there has just been astonishingly bad from my perspective, and I think most people in the world, in the free world, certainly. Um, it's disturbing to me that there are now some voices in the United States saying, well, maybe we shouldn't, this is not in our national interest, or this is just a territorial dispute between Russia and Ukraine. Well, I hardly think that a full-scale invasion of Russia to its smaller neighbor in the West is a territorial dispute.
no.
So I think that it's the only the concern I have is that I think initially the Biden administration equivocated. They weren't willing to send the right kind of weapons and material to Ukraine. And I think also the Trump administration, President Trump, I think, was not particularly good on this issue as well. I really do think that it's important for free nations in the world to stand up to this. And you also see, again, in the China parallel that we just discussed in terms of renewable energy,
Right.
you saw how Russia was willing to use the energy dominance it had over the nations of Western Europe, particularly Germany, to try to hold those nations hostage to its policy to keep them away from supporting Ukraine and resisting this invasion that is unprovoked. So I think that the world is a dangerous place, and we're reminded of that again. We have no holiday from history,
Right.
and it's truly important for nations like the United States, as well as Canada and the UK, et cetera. Now you're seeing Japan and Korea
Right.
building up their defenses, Australia as well. It's really important. The best way to preserve the peace is to be prepared for war, unfortunately.
It'll be interesting to see whether President Biden does make that point to Canada through his visit and through his address to Parliament. It's a point that President Obama made to the Canadian Parliament in his visit as well, that Canada has some work to do on living up to its NATO commitments. And if we want to be taken seriously as an ally, we have to meet those military and financial commitments. Canada was obvious in its absence in the recent AUKUS meeting in San Diego. So, is that a point that you see President Biden making?
I would hope so, and I think that it's critically important that we look at the defense expenditure and the preparedness of each of these nations to make sure that they're meeting that obligation. And I don't think Canada has met the 2% of GDP. No. To NATO, and I think that's a real problem, frankly. And it's obvious what China is attempting to do. It's certainly obvious what Russia is attempting to do, and now in league with Iran. This is a very dangerous world we're heading into, and I am concerned about the future unless we kind of wake up to the reality of what we're facing.
Yeah, and obviously we need the U.S. to be steadfast in that. We've got about 30 seconds left. Do you think Congress can work its way through some of these issues and be helpful?
Well, there's a new committee in the House on dealing with the threat from China. The very smart, capable people on both Democratic and Republican sides, led by Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin, dealing with this issue. So I do think we're capable of it. I hope we meet the test.
John Faso, always a pleasure to have you on the program. We really thank you for your time, and we'll be looking forward to seeing what happens in Ottawa next week with President Biden. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tony.
Always a pleasure to have former U.S. Congressman John Faso on. Really good insights, both on the trade issues, but also on the national security issues as well. Thanks for watching today.